Welcome back to the Force and Freedom podcast. We've been exploring the ways that images express ideas about freedom and threats to freedom. In the first episode, I gave some examples from the first couple of minutes. In the second, I focused in on some images that highlight a concern about how fear can undermine our freedom. I pointed out that the first scenes aboard the Death Star repeat this theme 3 times, with 3 separate visual reminders of the Death Star, small spheres that share some of the Death Star's features. The last of the small spheres pops up in the scene following the Death Star's destruction of Alderaan. In that scene, a game of holochess illustrates how fear can change the terms of engagement from ones we've agreed to ones we don't agree to. The association between the Empire and fear goes beyond the Death Star and the holochess match. Recall that in the first episode, I quoted Joe Johnston saying that the TIE fighters were supposed to achieve something of the effect of World War II super dive bombers. Those dive bombers had an artificial siren whale created by air ducts. Johnston said about the air ducts, they didn't serve any purpose except to create this noise, which would terrify people. It was intended that the TIE should achieve the same effect with just a menacing appearance. It was supposed to look terrifying, even though it wasn't necessary that all that stuff have a specific function. Imperial design is both about fear and conformity, and it's no accident that the two mix so well. Fear produces conformity. In this episode, I want to start by pointing out that some of the same points can be made using some details from George Lucas's own life. Prior to making Star Wars, Lucas directed a movie called THX 1138. It's an Orwellian movie. It's about an individual's struggle to escape from a dystopian world where people's lives, emotions, and thoughts are controlled by drugs and machines. At the time Lucas made THX, he wasn't known for his storytelling. He was known for short art films that aimed at a kind of visual poetry, and that's how he approached THX. There's an interview with an actor in that movie, Don Pedro Colley, and it gives us some insight into the process of making the movie. Colley was worried about Lucas's focus on visual poetry. He was worried it was making him neglect the storytelling. He described his concerns as follows. When the final cast was assembled, we worked very hard at letting George know that we were all responsible to Warner Brothers for the $1 million they fronted us to bring them a product that warranted their going out on a limb to an unproven first-time director. In fact, everyone's rep was on the line. We kept telling George, this film will not work unless we're able to breathe life into these characters. George wasn't too happy to have to deal with our ideas, but he came around. Notice what's motivating Colley. He's afraid that a powerful studio could be disappointed. He's afraid of the consequences for all involved. The fear of a box office failure doesn't just motivate the actors to do their work professionally. It motivates them to put unwelcome pressure on Lucas. Notice that Colley doesn't frame the issue in terms of wanting to make a great movie for its own sake or for the audience's benefit. He doesn't say, hey, George, I have some ideas for making a better movie. Instead, he frames his concerns in terms of fear of betraying the studio's trust. He says, hey, George, I'm worried about what the studios are going to think. Fear will keep the local systems in line. The irony is that THX is itself a dystopian movie about Big Brother controlling everyone's lives. As Colley puts it in the same interview, when THX hit the screen, you were thrown into a world that was not that far in the future. The idea that Big Brother not only was watching, but was controlling every part of your life. So here Lucas is making a movie about Big Brother watching everyone, and he's surrounded by people pressuring him to watch his step because Warner Brothers is watching him. Now, as we saw before, fear tends to change the terms of engagement. Fear of the studio can turn decisions that could otherwise be about artistic vision or even pleasing audiences into decisions about pleasing the studio. And Lucas abhorred these terms of engagement. He hated studio involvement in his artistic process. Now, Lucas was a little unusual in not being afraid of the studios and their power, at least not the way that Colley was. Lucas was more like Han or Obi-Wan. But of course, fear of the studios is rooted in the economic and legal power the studios have over filmmakers. So although not being afraid made Lucas freer than Colley, not being afraid alone only got him so far, especially when he was surrounded by people who were afraid. In the end, the studio was in fact worried about THX and decided to cut it shorter. And Lucas faced the same problem with the studio cutting several minutes from his second feature-length movie, American Graffiti, and it infuriated him again. Lucas said, there was no reason for the cutting. It was just arbitrary. You do a film like American Graffiti or THX, it takes 2 years of your life. You get paid hardly anything at all, and you sweat blood. You write it, you slave over it, you stay up 28 nights getting cold and sick. Then you put it together and you've lived with it. It's exactly like raising a kid. You raise a kid for 2 or 3 years. You struggle with it. Then somebody comes along and says, well, it's a very nice kid, but I think we ought to cut off one of its fingers. So they take their little axe and chop off one of the fingers. They say, don't worry, nobody will notice. She'll live. Everything will be all right. But I mean, it hurts a great deal. In another interview, Lucas described the Hollywood film studios like this. They're rather sleazy, unscrupulous people. LA is where they make deals, do business in the classic corporate American way, which is screw everybody and do whatever you can to make the biggest profit. They don't care about people. It's incredible the way they treat filmmakers, because they have no idea what making a movie is about. To them, the deal is the movie. They have no idea of the suffering, the hard work. They're not filmmakers. I don't want to have anything to do with them. He said, Universal wanted to take 5 minutes out of American Graffiti. 5 minutes in a movie is not going to make a difference. It was nothing more than an exercise in authority. Universal saying they had the right. Lucas was so upset about this that he swore to get total independence from the studios. Part of Lucas's aim in creating the Star Wars franchise was to earn enough money that he wouldn't have to ask the studios for money again, so that they couldn't dictate the terms of engagement to him. His dream was to create a place called Skywalker Ranch, where independent filmmakers could experiment and create art films, free from the studio's control. He was already dreaming of this while making THX. At the time, Lucas was working with Francis Ford Coppola's production company, American Zoetrope, which Lucas managed to sync with the box office failure of his THX. Lucas described American Zoetrope's operating scheme as basically the opposite of Hollywood's. He said, we say, we think you are a talented, functioning person, and we're hiring you because of your abilities. And whatever you come up with, we're going to take. If we make a mistake, it'll be in picking the wrong person. What we're striving for is total freedom, where we can finance our pictures, make them our way, release them where we want them released, and be completely free to express ourselves. That's very hard to do in the world of business. In this country, the only thing that speaks is money, and you have to have the money in order to have the power to be free. So the danger is in being as oppressive as the next guy to the people below you. We're going to do everything possible to avoid that pitfall, but if we fail, it's another saga in the history of man. So I hope you can see how these ideas about fear, domination, fair terms of engagement, and freedom were pretty clearly at the front of Lucas's mind when he was writing Star Wars, and so it's no surprise that Star Wars deals with these themes. In fact, even while Lucas was working on Star Wars, there was a strong sense that Fox was not respecting Lucas. Warren Hellman said, my perception is there was a lack of respect for George. The movie industry is a very vituperative and petty industry most of the time. And part of the negotiations was just to see how much they could push George around because they felt like they could. But these aren't just themes from Lucas's life. This problem of fear dictating the terms of our decisions is something that most of us encounter regularly. Even in situations where we're not dominated by economic, political, or other kinds of coercive power, think about how fear works in social pressure. Think about all the things that people do or don't do because they're worried about what someone else will do, say, or think in response. If you're afraid of what someone will do, say, or think, they don't ever have to do, say, or think it for their presence to dominate your decision-making. So Star Wars is about an everyday problem. We're surrounded by social force fields and tractor beams like the ones the Death Star makes. Mohandas Gandhi felt that internal freedom from fear had to precede external freedom. During his fight against British colonial rule, he wrote, I've come to the conclusion that we should stop going to law courts. Taking such cases to the courts does little good. Where the peasants are so crushed and fear-stricken, law courts are useless. The real relief for them is to be free from fear. You can win a battle for a right here, there in the courts. But when you live in fear of what the British colonial rulers will do to you, you won't enjoy any real freedom because you're too scared of what the rulers might do to you. The fear-stricken peasants didn't just avoid crossing the legal line. They went out of their way to keep the British from getting upset with them, even when the law didn't require it. We saw last time that the remote Luke is training with is a visual reminder of the Death Star, and so Luke's training against the remote is a sort of metaphor for how to deal with fear and maintain our freedom. And we saw that Han is critical of Obi-Wan's coaching, that he seems to have his own approach to fear. I want to quickly review what I said last time and then give some illustrations of the two strategies from the film itself. Han's approach to someone using fear to try to change the terms of engagement is to accept the new terms and do his best under them. If Greedo's drawn blaster makes the conversation into a gunfight, then try to win the gunfight. Shoot first. Han has a sort of natural courage bordering on rashness. He's not immobilized by fear the way others are. He's learned how to fend for himself. But his approach doesn't solve the deeper problem that fear creates. He engages with the Empire on their terms, which means that everything is decided by violence. And as we saw, in the long run, that's a losing strategy because the Empire has the most firepower. That's why the Empire chooses those terms. Obi-Wan has a different strategy in mind. Don't let others dictate the terms of engagement to you. After all, when you've let others dictate the terms, you're already unfree. Instead, take a step back from the situation and learn to see it with new eyes. As soon as Han and Obi-Wan's conversation has laid out their differing views, the film starts illustrating the contrast in strategies. As they drop out of hyperspace, a TIE fighter fires on the Falcon before screaming past the cockpit, racing away. Han thinks they should chase it down and blow it up, and that fits perfectly with his approach to fear. He's taking things on Imperial terms. There's a fighter. What should we do? Let's fight it. He's reactive. He's following his opponent's moves. And his opponent hopes that he'll do just that. The TIE fighter is bait to lure him close enough to get caught in the tractor beam. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan has been suggesting alternatives. He thinks they should let the fighter go. He points out that a fighter that size couldn't have gotten this deep into space on its own. And he's the first to realize that the Death Star is no moon, but a space station, and suggests that they turn around. When it's clear that there's no turning around, Han swears that they won't get him without a fight. But Obi-Wan suggests they look for alternatives. The first alternative is to hide themselves in secret compartments, a plan Han Solo evidently doesn't much like even after it's worked. The whole cockpit scene is a contrast between Han taking the terms that the Empire gives him, physical force and violence, and Obi-Wan suggesting that they consider other terms, other ways of engaging with the Empire, or of avoiding engagement altogether. And this is just a preview of what's going to happen on board the Death Star. The hero's time on board the Death Star is a continuous juxtaposition of these opposed ways of dealing with fear, which makes sense. Think about it. The heroes are now aboard a symbol of fear and control, and they're trying to get free from it. The first thing they do is smuggle themselves in Han's smuggling compartments. Think about that. They're not just hiding contraband goods, they're hiding themselves. The individual self has no business on this space station. On the Death Star, everyone wears a uniform. Most of them even have identical masks covering their faces. Individuality has no place here. So it's natural that Luke and Han have to dress up as stormtroopers to get around. And Chewie, who can't fit in stormtrooper armor, has to walk around in shackles. Not long after they blow their cover, they end up in a trash compactor, a sort of mechanical stomach that tries to digest them, recalling our earlier thoughts about empire and control. The thought is clear. On the Death Star, you have to conform. And if you're not in conformity, the Death Star is going to try to force you to conform. Notice that Obi-Wan doesn't have to dress up as a stormtrooper to avoid problems, and he doesn't end up in a trash compactor. Obi-Wan has a way of dealing with the Death Star that allows him to maintain his individuality without fighting. We'll talk about that next episode. First, I want to focus on how Han handles the Death Star. Now, if you've seen the next two movies, it's easy to forget what Han is like in A New Hope. In the later movies, Han always has some clever trick up his sleeve. But in A New Hope, Han seems to have only one answer to any problem. Shoot it. He doesn't just try this on stormtroopers. He shoots the comlink when his conversation is going poorly. He shoots the door to the trash compactor to try to get out, even as his friends try to warn him it's magnetically sealed. He shoots into the trash compactor again after they get out to show Chewie there's nothing to be afraid of, in spite of Leia's warning that their enemies will hear him. Probably the best example comes when they round a corner to find themselves face to face with a dozen stormtroopers. Han shoots one, and instead of running away, charges after the rest of them as they retreat. When he rounds another corner to find they've regrouped, it's his turn to beat a hasty retreat. The only thing Han suggests besides shooting things is running away. Han's even impatient with the clever ideas other people come up with. He objects to having to smuggle himself in the secret compartments on his ship. After they manage to get themselves into the command office by disguising themselves in stormtrooper uniforms and pretending to have a transmitter malfunction, Luke complains that Han is making too much noise with his blasting, and Han responds,
"Bring him on. I prefer a straight fight to all this sneaking around."
He complains to the princess twice about her leading them into the trash compactor. Han doesn't like creative solutions. Blasting and running are the obvious moves when you accept the terms of engagement dictated by the Empire. That's what the stormtroopers do. Run and blast. In limiting himself to those options, Han is accepting the terms the Empire dictates to him, terms of violence and coercion. He's braver than most.
Certainly has courage.
And fear doesn't completely immobilize him like it does others. But he lets it dictate the terms. Now contrast Han's one-dimensional blast and run approach with what we see from Luke. Luke is a Jedi in training, and we can already see some of Obi-Wan's influence on him. The first time we see Luke reframe a conflict is in his argument with Han about rescuing Leia. Han doesn't want to rescue the princess, and he's unmoved by Luke's pleading.
"But they're gonna kill her! Better her than me."
Luke pauses to think, and we can see on his face the moment the light bulb goes off.
"She's rich."
Up until that moment, Luke has been trying to argue with Han in terms of what Luke himself cares about. Since Han doesn't share Luke's point of view, the arguments fall on deaf ears. But suddenly Luke realizes this and inhabits Han's perspective. What Han cares about is money, and the princess is bound to have some money. So by stepping out of his own perspective into a larger world, Luke is able to make things happen. A similar sort of creativity gets them to the detention center. Luke probably asks himself, what would be a legitimate reason for us to go to the detention center? Taking prisoners there. Where could we find a prisoner? One of us would do. And how about Chewie, since he can't fit in a stormtrooper uniform? Luke isn't the only one with clever ideas. When Leia shows up, she adds her fair share. It's Leia who finds a way out of the detention area through the garbage chute, when neither Han nor Luke have any ideas about getting out through the doors. And that's fitting, because Leia is a seasoned rebel fighter, and it'll turn out that she has some sense for the Force as well. Leia also offers the first idea for how to deal with the trash compactor by bracing the walls with bits of trash. It doesn't work, but it's the first idea. It's Luke who solves the trash compactor problem by realizing that he can contact C-3PO through the comlink and get R2 to shut the trash compactor down and open the door. And finally, Luke manages to get himself and Leia across the chasm on a rope after he's destroyed the controls to the bridge. Destroying the controls to the bridge might be a little more Han-like, but after that, Luke needs to get a little bit more creative. All of these solutions require some creative thinking, some non-obvious solution to a problem. And not all of them are cases where an opponent has tried to present them with certain terms. The trash compactor was not designed to attack humans in it, but the same sort of creativity that allows you to get out of the terms others try to impose on you can help you rethink all sorts of situations. And Luke and Leia are able to choose their own terms by discovering alternative ways of engaging or avoiding engagements with their enemy. All of these more creative approaches to problems are foreshadowed by Luke's training. Recall that Obi-Wan made Luke fight the remote blind. It's easy to fall into the habit of seeing things the way that fear presents them to us. In fact, it can be important to see them the way fear presents them to us. Fear can warn us about real dangers. But sometimes, fear moves us to do things that are counterproductive. And sometimes it short-circuits our thinking so that we don't see all the options available to us. Anyone who understands this side of fear can use this power to control us. So the Jedi needs to learn to see things without eyes of fear. That, I think, is why Obi-Wan suggests fighting with the blast shield down. By depriving Luke of his vision, Obi-Wan is helping Luke get in touch with alternative ways of seeing the challenge he's facing. When he was relying on eyesight, Luke was always reacting to the remote, always worried about getting zapped, always a step behind it, his movements always controlled by the remote's movements. To be free, Luke needs to find a way of dealing with the remote that doesn't give the remote the upper hand. He needs to anticipate and not just react. And that requires learning alternative ways of grasping his situation, ways of grasping the situation that don't allow the remote to set the terms of engagement. I think it's important to see that the Jedi strategy is not just about mystical power. In the movies, there is a mystical power, and it's fun to watch. And there's some stirring music that plays sometimes when it's used. But the Jedi represent principles that very much apply to the real world. Now, we still haven't talked about what the Jedi Master himself does aboard the Death Star. But we're out of time for this week, so we'll have to get to that next episode. Until then, may the Force be with you.